When you start creating, it's good to have a primed surface that is light. That way, when you add the color, you will need less paint to cover the area you need to cover. So in the long run, by adding the primer and getting the surface ready, it actually does save you money from buying the more expensive paints that go on top of it. Once the primer is on the wall, I like to let it dry, usually overnight. The next day, I like to take a Sharpie and do a basic drawing. Now, I'm not trying to do a sketch and make it look really cool. What I'm doing is I'm doing a rough outline like a map. I'm trying to figure out what needs paint colors where. So, for example, the water is going to be blue, but the boat and the islands will not be blue. So I don't need to put blue there. And it seems pretty common sense, but there are some techniques that painters use. Bob Ross was amazing for doing this, where he would do wet on wet. And that is a totally awesome, beautiful technique. But when it's coming time to do the wall and like you have limited resources and time, and because the space is so large, especially now, there's a tiny bit of a little bit of a wind happening, so the paint's drying really quickly and it's too big of a space. So what I've done is I did a basic outline with the Sharpie, and I have the clouds and everything, and then I'm going with the blue and just kind of filling in where the blue needs to be. Now, I always think it's cool to do a 3D effect in the sky. When I look up to the sky, I see it very blotchy, like it's not just one straight color of blue. And so I noticed that also when you look out into the horizon, it tends to be a lighter shade of blue in nature. And as you go further, you look further up and straight up, then it gets darker and darker. It's the, space and darkness. And then we have light and lights bouncing around the earth and like how it kind of curves around the earth and all that. And so we see that. So it gets lighter at the bottom and darker at the top. The way I'm achieving this is I'm using my 2-inch square brush, and on my plate I have one area where I've squirted white paint and the other where I've squirted blue paint. Now I haven't mixed this paint on the plate itself. I kind of keep them both in their sections. And so at the beginning, by the water, I added a whole bunch of white and with just a little bit of blue, and then I mixed it on the canvas as I'm going. And then as I go higher and higher, I just stop adding so much white to the canvas. I add a little bit more blue and a little bit more blue till I get to the top. Now, doing this method is going to really help the sky look way different and be a different entity than the water itself. When I did the water, all I did was just go with the straight blue, and I made sure with the same 2-inch square brush, I went back and forth horizontally. And this starts giving it kind of a wavy, bumpy look by making sure that all my brush strokes are horizontal. Now with the sky, I'm going more of a circular motion because I am painting on a wood board and there's a lot of grooves and crevices. I really want to get in there, and it's also helping me to blend with the sky a little bit more. Now I will come back to the water, but I'm going to allow it to dry for now, so that way when I add other colors, they're going to be really bright and poppy. I don't want the water to blend as much for this particular painting, for this style of painting. If I am painting maybe a smaller canvas and I put more time and I'm trying to do a realism techniques, well, realism is when a painting looks more like a photograph and what we see with our eyes. Modern art is more kind of just randomness that's different conceptual ideas, and then impressionism is kind of in the middle. So like, for example, Van Gogh was an impressionist painter. They looked cool. You could tell that like what he was painting, you knew what it was, but it didn't quite look like a photograph. So I'm kind of trying to stay in the middle of that with some impressionism. The more detail and the more little effort that you put with those details and the more brushes you use, the better results you're going to get for a more realism type 3D look, where it's going to look basically like a photograph. But for right now, I'm just kind of going and trying to hit it somewhere in the middle. So make sure that you're blending a lot and you're really working on it. One thing too, as I did this, I'm kind of going a little bit fast because it does hurt my arm a little bit to stretch up there and just to have my arm the whole time. Now, it took me 3 hours to paint this, and it doesn't seem long, it's pretty fast, but when you got 3 hours of holding your arm straight up in the air, it kind of starts hurting. So every so often I like to change hands back and forth. It'll help me so I can continue to go faster. Now I'm going to add the brown. I have switched my brush to, oh geez, I don't remember the size. It's a round. I have a large round brush. I am also using hog bristles and synthetic bristles. I don't prefer when it comes to doing a mural using any kind of human hair or like basically brushes you would use with watercolor that are very soft. I like to use more coarse brushes with the wall because they hold more paint. The human hair brushes and animal hair, they're very soft and they just hold more water. And I don't really want to add a lot of water to this paint. So every time that I'm going, and I do have my table off to the side, I have a little pop-up table thing that I can stick in my car. And so it's a small table. I have my brushes, my paint. I do like to have at least 3 of each size brushes, and each painting I do, I usually have about 5 different sizes of brushes. Filbert Brights are really great. They're my favorite type of brush, but right now I'm using a large round. So I went from the large square to a large round. This is more of an artist brush. Honestly, when it comes to murals, I have found that when you go to like places like Home Depot, those are more the type of brushes you're going to want to use versus going to like Michael's and spending like $6 on a fancy brush. It's probably going to get destroyed, especially if you're painting on a wood board. So yeah, it's pretty simple, honestly. It seems very scary and stressful that like, oh, it's this whole wall. And I do, even after all these years, I get those moments where I'm like, no, but then, you got to be brave and you just got to do it and let it happen. And then the more you work with it, you let it dry in places, come back, add more detail, let it dry, come back, add more detail, and it'll really come together. Now, I am using acrylic paint. I prefer acrylic paint over oil paint because just the weather, honestly. I feel that acrylic paint can do what oil paints do, but the acrylic paint is way cheaper and it's more durable. It holds up longer. It's water-based versus oil-based. I feel it's a lot easier. Now you can use outdoor, like go to Home Depot and get them to mix you paint and stuff. That's cool too. But I'm going to be honest here. I've done that method and it's really expensive. It really honestly depends on the size of your wall because if you price it out per ounce, when you get like exterior paint, it actually, because then you have like the gloss and the satin and you have all the different ones and the mixtures, it really adds up after a while. Also, another thing that I do is that when I'm painting my canvases, I have my paint and I bought it's brand new. But then you're only got like a third of the bottle left or something. I reserve that paint, save it, and then whenever I do a mural, I kind of use the end of the bottle stuff because honestly, it's outside. So if it's outside, it's going to be all weathered. Now, if it's indoor and I have a customer and they pay me a lot, then yeah, I use the good quality stuff, brand new paint that's good. And now I'm talking about I paint all the time. So I'm able to reserve my used paint that I only have like maybe like 2 squirts out of the tube left. I go through a tube of paint about every 2 to 3 months. So it's very rare for me to have paint where I've had it so long that it dried. But honestly, especially when it comes to like rocks. Now I notice that I'm using brown. I'm going in with some dark brown, some light brown, a little bit of gold, and I'm adding a little white in there. And I'm just basically doing what they call it, impasto technique, where I'm just kind of slapping on the paint. Okay, now when I was doing this and I was filming it and then I had to download the sections of video from my GoPro, it got all backwards on me. So I'm so sorry about it, that it cut out, but stick with me in the video. You'll see the other parts that we skipped ahead of. Now I'm doing the sails. Now remember how I said about doing the background white first? Well, this is really helping me for the sails right now. Now I've switched to a small, I would say a medium round brush. It's typically a large for when I'm doing my little 8x10 paintings. It would be considered my large round. But this one is medium round for this size of a canvas. Now I'm putting the grays on the corners because what I'm trying to do is a gradient. I'm trying to get dark gray to light gray all the way to white. And this is going to start giving more of a 3D effect. Another thing that I'm preferring to do is use 1 or 2 colors at a time. I'm not all over the canvas here and there and everywhere. I take a little section of the area and I just work on that. And especially when it comes to blending. This is acrylic paint, so it's going to dry pretty fast. And today it's about 85 degrees outside, so it's pretty warm. It's got a light breeze, so my paint's going to dry extra quicker today. And so what I'm doing is just taking my little square area of the sail and I'm going back and forth and just working on that so I can get a nice blend. I'm really working it back and forth with the brush. Now I'm moving on to the other sails. When I do that, if I have my brush is more tinted gray or more tinted white, that area is where I'll start with. So I want the gray to be more in the corner to show it's like the sail is kind of being pushed in the wind. It's a little bent and it's a little bit of a shadow on the sail. So because I have gray, that's the area I want to start with my next little area because it's already on the brush and I don't have to go back and clean my brush. And I'm also working really, really fast. So yes, I do clean the brush often. I clean my brush maybe like I would say about every 5 minutes, especially between colors. But when you're working on a color, every so often it's a good idea to clean the brush because it gets a little cakey. And when it starts getting too cakey and it's a little sticky onto the canvas, then that's about the good time to wash the brush. So now I'm going with some yellow and I'm going to do everything in the painting that has a little bit of yellow. So the sun needs a little bit of yellow, the flags need some yellow, and then in the lighthouse I'm going to make the windows yellow so it's going to appear as though there's a candle in the windows. Now with the sun, it's super fun. I always try to put like yellow down first and then I add just a little bit of green. And I still have my round brush, and I'm kind of like doing a stippling technique. So I first laid down the yellow, and then a hint of orange, and I'm pretty much dotting the sun is basically what I'm doing. But I'm dotting it so much that it kind of blends in sort of, but doesn't. It still has some really sharp areas of yellow and some sharp areas of orange, but you don't really see the dot like a circle. It's like it's just tapped in there and it really gives the sun a 3D effect. And also with the sun, it's a good idea to not make a sharp edge all the way around it and to let it look like some solar flares are coming off. Now I'm running into a problem here where one of my boats and the rocks over here, they're just blending in, they're the same color. Now I have to go back and forth to get different colors. And I want to make sure that the boats are standing out from the rocks. So the way I do that is I'm still using brown because they're made out of wood. So it's basically just a highlight and shadow thing. The boats are going to be a little bit darker than the rocks themselves. And so just having that distinction there, they're really going to pop. But I still want to have different colors within the boats, but I'm just not going to be as drastic with the color changes on the boats than I am with the rocks. So that way the boats are going to appear to be a different material than the stones themselves. Now, when it comes to the trees, I'm doing the exact same thing that I did with the sun, but instead of using yellow and orange, I'm using green, white, and or you know what? Actually, I didn't have green when I painted this. I had blue, so I had an area of my plate with blue, another area with yellow, and a little bit of white on another space. And then I kind of mixed them just a little bit on the plate, and then I applied that onto the canvas. But I still had a gob of yellow and a gob of blue. And as I'm working on the trees, I'm mixing as I go. And I kind of mix on the palette a little bit versus mixing on the canvas right here. Now, the only reason why is because I want the trees to start appearing to look like they have branches on them, and some of the leaves are going to be turned in all different ways. So some leaves will be darker, some will be lighter, and the more detail that you go back and forth with all the different shades of green that you're mixing on your palette, the better it'll get, especially when you're doing that the stippling method where you're taking the brush and you're just tapping the canvas. So no swooshes, just a lot of tapping, and every so often go back and get a different color. And then it's also good, you know, towards the end, I like to start more with darker colors and then work to a lighter color. And I want it to be very super choppy. And then towards the end, I'll add a little bit of white in there and a little bit of yellow. And if you notice right here, it's getting a lot lighter. So the highlights are on the shadows and they really just make the tree pop. And I also am trying to make them look like bushes that are like, here's one and here's another. Now it doesn't show up that great on the video, but if we get up closer to it and you could see it without the video, you can really start seeing that like there's individual trees and bushes and they have their own little personality going on, and that really adds and it helps with depth. Depth is a really good thing to also add to your paintings. The more that you can overlap things in your design, the more 3D they're going to start appearing. And I mean, it's very common sense, but you really got to, like for me, I really had to work on that. It was common sense to say and to know, but to do it in practice, to really think about how the layout of the design is going to be, I still to this day, I have to like really take a moment and think about it and be like, okay, well, it's more overlapping is better. More details you put, better. You just really honestly got to work it. The only way you're going to really know how to do murals is just by doing them. Honestly, that's how I learned. I went to the university. I took many art classes. I teach now, but I still, with myself, am still constantly, I watch YouTube videos. I still am educating myself and practicing my craft. And the more that I do it, I've noticed I'm figuring out how to use the medium a little bit better and working on it. So, I mean, this is a great painting, but I'm sure in 20 years from now, my murals are going to be more amazing than this one. So if you make a mural and it's not super great, don't worry about it. It's just paint. If you hate the mural, you can either paint over it, but you might still have some outlines going through. I would recommend maybe sanding the wall first, cleaning it up and then painting over it again. I mean, there's so many choices that you can do. So don't stress out. Just let it happen and just work with the medium, because the more that you work in the medium, the better it's going to get. Also, too, now, I'm not trying to sell you products or anything like that or anything, but if you go on my website, I have a list of brands that I use, and honestly, I've tried all the brands. I've been doing this now for I think it's like 17 years since I was in school, and so since I started school, so I've been doing it for quite some time now, and I've tried all the brands, and honestly, I find that the middle of the road ones for me tend to work good. I mean, the really fancy expensive ones are nice, but sometimes they might be a little too thick, which then you add water, but I like it. I prefer paint when I can squeeze it out of the tube and it's not too runny and it's not too thick. Everybody has a different preference. Bob Ross was really into thick quality paint. His oil paints were really thick. and the art Sherpa, she likes to water down her paints a lot. Hers are not the paint that she uses, her style and technique. It's not as, she starts with thick paint, but if you notice what she's painting, she's adding lots of water. Even when she says she doesn't, I mean, if you're watching the video, yeah, you can see that she's not. Bob Ross used to beat up his brush a lot on the canvas to get as much moisture and paint thinner out as possible. So everybody's got a different technique, and I'm not saying one's better than the other. It's just, it is what it is, you know? It's just, you got to work with it until you find what you're happy with and what you like. Also, with different brushes too, you just got to work and see what brand and what type. So, like right now, I really am into Filbert Brights. I mean, I'm not, it's not a, well, it used to be a brand, but like, just the style of the half rounded square brush, I find that I have so much control with them. So, but who knows, you know, 5 years from now, I'll be like, oh, it's all about the round. Or, you know, a couple years ago, I was all about the square brush. So, you know, it kind of changes. This one though, I'm mostly just using squares and rounds for this one because that's kind of what I had on hand at the moment. This painting was kind of like like, you want to paint? I was like, sure. Then I went and hurried up and got my stuff. So, okay, now with the clouds. So we had where it was white on the canvas, and then I painted the blue. Now, I don't have to really paint over the clouds because I have the white underneath. However, I do think it's cool to give a little bit of a shadow in the clouds because then it makes it like a little bit more 3D. Now, I've spent a lot of time actually just staring at clouds. Like, honestly, really, before I paint things, I like to take a moment and just study what it is that I'm looking at. And so, yeah, like earlier this morning, I was staring at the clouds and just looking at them. And I've noticed that these type of clouds that I'm painting, they oftentimes are pretty gray underneath and then they're lighter on the top because the sun, the way the sun's hitting them and shining, I've got the highlight there. Now, if I add the highlight more towards the bottom area of the cloud a little bit, like and more towards like where Earth would be in the picture, then like that gives the viewer the perspective that they're up high or they're at the level with or higher than the clouds and they're looking down because the sun would be behind them and they're looking at what the sun is shining. So now going underneath here and adding the gray and then fading it up, that's giving the perspective of the shadow that the sun is up high, there's the cloud, and then there's me. So think about that when you do your shadows, especially with pretty much everything. Think about where your main light source, with this case, would be the sun. So where that's going. Now, also, this is Impressionism right here. So there is going to be a lot of light reflected off of the water, and then also the sun is behind the clouds in the image. But honestly, I mean, we're doing a little bit cartoony here. I'm not trying to be in the realism realm. And so you would still have the white, but it would be a little bit more grays and muted tones and not as bright. But I figure for the patio, having the bright poppy colors just really, I don't know, it just really pops. And I feel like with wall murals, the more that you make it pop with color, the more it's like, oh, look at that. And it's more ambiance-y. But really, I mean, it really, you know, you could have and paint, because I've seen them. For example, where I live here, there is a wall mural where they did of George Washington. Beautiful. Oh my goodness, painting. They touch it up every spring. I mean, it's beautiful painting. And they put hours and hours and hours into the blend and the color, and it looks great. And it looks like a photograph, and I love it. But the thing is, it doesn't really look like a painting anymore. You know, the city pays the artist every year to freshen it up over in the spring, and it almost kind of starts looking like in the middle of summer, the painting looks like it was just like a vinyl, like somebody printed a photo and then just kind of vinyled it onto the wall. And it doesn't have is like an artsy type of a vibe to it. And it's like the wall is right next to across the street from an art museum. So it's kind of like, I mean, which is cool, and photographs are art too, but it just doesn't have like a feel to it. It's, but it is what it is. So yeah, I'm thinking a little cartoon. And when you do a little bit more cartoony, the stress is kind of off a little bit. Like I don't feel as stressed because I could do something and be like, oh yeah, I meant to do that. That's how my world looks and that's how I wanted it. Whereas when you're trying, like if you have a customer and they really want that realism look, it's a lot more stressful. Now it's achievable. And all it is just spending more time and using smaller and smaller paint brushes to put smaller and smaller details and to blend and blend and blend and blend. And the more you blend and the more details you put, the more it's going to start looking like a photograph. So think about it when you're talking about prices with the customer. Think about how much do you want to get paid, and how much is the art supplies going to cost. And at the end of the day, you don't want to be working when you're done with the project. You don't want to have made $2 an hour, because you already negotiated a price. And so that's, it's your time, it's your effort. You got to support yourself. So, and then there is the ethical part also about, well, but is it really art? And you're just doing kitsch art and you're just trying to sell and make money. And it's like, yes and no at the same time. This is what I can do. This is what I got. And you knew before you signed up a contract with me, you saw my other art pieces and you saw the level of work I can do and the quality I can do. And this is what you get. And so let them know, let the customer really see what you can do, your other paintings and where you are. So that way they can really visualize what it's going to look like. Now, I do have customers that ask me to do like their company logo. I just did in a boutique. I did their logo on the back wall, and it was very simple. I mean, it was like I sketched it out. It was just 3 colors, very like no shading at all. It was very simple and basic. Now, when it's something like that and it's somebody's logo, I like to make sure that I have the shades that they're going for. Like if their logo is blue, then I want to make sure I've picked the right blue. So sometimes I'll tell the customer, well, how about you buy the paint and my fee is $20, $30, $10 an hour, whatever is your fee, and then they just buy all the art supplies. You can do that too. I have noticed that in my case, they oftentimes don't want to do that. They're like, no, I'll just pay you when you do it. Or take them with you when you go to Home Depot to make sure that they pick out the specific color that you want Home Depot to make for that, or to the art store. I mean, now I'm talking about if you're doing Home Depot, like Lowe's, if you're doing a huge, huge logo, then it's better to go with that paint, especially exterior. And if it's going to, have a lot of wind and sun and like if there's cars driving in the front of the store or something like that, the smoke of the cars over the year, it's going to really get in there. Also, too, at the end, I didn't film it in this video because I thought it was like whatever, but like at the end, I let it dry overnight. And then I actually ended up letting this sit for 2 days. And it was pretty sunshiny. It hadn't rained at all. And I went over and I put a clear coat on it. Now this is outside, so keep in mind it's going to weather. It's not going to stay perfect and pristine unless like it's interior. Even if you have a painting in the interior, if you have sunlight on it every day, it still fades it over time. All the dark colors will become lighter. And that's what's going to happen to this over time. But you know what, though? If it does, you can always be like, hey, well, in 2-3 years, if you want me to touch it up, you know where to get a hold of me. and stuff like that. And so that's good, have repeat business. Also too, I always like to sign my work. When you sign your work, make sure it doesn't distract from the image, because I've seen some people do that, which is totally cool, but then it almost becomes a focal point within the painting. And so if you're advertising for yourself, then that might be a really good thing to do. But this is in somebody's backyard, so it's going to be them and their guests when they go back there. So I don't really need to advertise, but I still do like to sign it. I'll usually pick somewhere, anywhere in the painting where it just seems like it would make like a spot where it's going to stand out, but yet still kind of be within what's going on. So at the end of this painting here, I went with the rocks and I lightly did a section where it was a light brown, and then I went over with a black and I wrote my name. And yeah, it's always good, because I've also seen some artists where they don't sign, or they sign on the back of a canvas or something, and then nobody sees it. And they don't know who you are, because what if they really like the painting and they want another one? So always make sure you sign it. Okay, so now with the lighthouse over here, I did want to blend. Now I'm sure you know about the blending and how the light shines, and this lighthouse is a cylinder. So on the edges of the lighthouse, I've used my white, and my white is a little bit darker of a shade. It's got a little yellow tint to it compared to the primer that was on the wall. So I just kind of painted the edges of the lighthouse where it's white a little bit, and it doesn't show up on the video at all, but being there in person, I can really see how it's giving a shadow on the sides of the building, but then it's still in the middle. It's got that straight white area, and so it gives it more of a 3D cylinder type look. I've taken that concept and moved that same concept up to the clouds. Some of the cloud area I've left with the primer, and then I've also added a little bit of my white and then a little bit of the gray. Okay, so now let's work on the water and touching up here and there, everywhere's little things. Now with the water, I'm going to go back and forth with lighter and darker strips. I'm making sure that I keep my brush horizontal, because it's really going to help start letting those waves appear. I like to have, when it's far off in the distance, they're going to be smaller horizontal stripes, and as they come closer to me, the stripes get longer and longer, and this is really going to help with the 3D look and the feel. Another thing I didn't mention was that, do you see the ship right there, how there's a white line? Now I think it's a good idea to also put with the water a little bit of white in the water, where it's showing that the waves are kind of coming up and crashing the boat. Now there's 3 boats in this image. With the big boat, I added the white all the way across it, which is it'll give the appearance that the boat is sitting in water, the waves are crashing onto it, and it's moving very slowly. Now in the other one, that's the boat that is underneath of the lighthouse, notice how there's only just a little bit of white on the one side. Now this is to show that the back of the boat, that there's a little bit of a surf and the water's getting thrown up into the air just ever so slightly from the middle to the back of the boat, with a little bit of a tail out with the water behind the boat a little bit. And this shows that that boat is going a little bit faster than the other boat that is closer. And the boat that is way far in the back, I want to make him appear to go like he's the fastest. So I pretty much mostly just gave him a tail and then a little bit of white underneath of that boat, but not much. And it'll really give the impression of movement. Now I'm going ahead and I switched over my brush to a small round, and I'm doing the mast and the pole for the flag, and so I'm just making straight lines to connect them now that I like where the water is. Because also, if you were to do this at the beginning of the painting and then you had to paint the blue around those sections, what's going to happen is the color that you're using is not going to be consistent from right to left of where the pole is that cuts it in half. So it'll be disjointed. So when I added the water, I just went and added the water all around, and now I let it dry. And I'm coming back to it, and now I'm drawing a straight line down, and this is helping me to make a straighter line, but then also behind it looks as though the wave is still kind of there, and it's just that that thing is in front and it's breaking it, and that's why I don't see it, and then it's very consistent with the wave. And honestly, with water, you can go back and forth and back and forth. Remember how I said the more details you put and the smaller brushes you get and the more details, the more it's going to start looking pretty cool. I'm trying to stay in the realm of dark blue, light blue. I have little hints of white for little tiny caps of the waves that are random, but I'm not doing a whole lot of white. I do have a little turquoise that's happening. Now notice how I'm not really blending on my palette. I'm mostly blending in the water. So I'm taking my brush, making horizontal stripes, and each time I go, I kind of go down on my plate to a different part of the shades of blue, because I did mix tad bit when I'm going back and forth many times. It starts kind of naturally mixing itself onto the palette, which has given me differences in shades. So it's just working it back and forth and taking your time. Now this painting did take to sketch out the design and do the primer was about an hour, and then painting it was 3 hours, so 4 hours in total. Now this is me, and this is how I do it. If it takes you 3 days, it takes you 3 days, okay? That's just how it is. But also, when you're painting, have it in the back of your mind to finish the painting, because I've had a lot of students where they get in their head and they don't continue and they don't push themselves, and then they're forever on the same image, the same painting, and they never grow as an artist because they're never reaching out and trying new things because they're always on that one painting. And so, yeah, try to just, push yourself forward and get it done. Now, I feel that the painting is done when, well, all of it's painted. And then also I start getting tired, and I just start feeling like I start getting annoyed with the paint. I'm like, I'm done. I'm over. Like, next, something new. And when I start getting that feeling, then I know that I'm finished. Now, there have been many times, especially when I was a beginning painter, where I would just, no, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. And I kept working and kept working and kept working. I'd be all tired. And the more tired I got, the more annoyed I got. The more annoyed I got, the worse the painting started becoming. Like I just kept fixing it too much to where it was just, like, it just started going into blah. So try to stop yourself, like, the moments before you start feeling like blah. I did also take a few little 5-minute breaks here because I was having issues with my GoPro. It would only let me capture 40 minutes at a time for the SD card. So I kept having to stop and load that for the video from the GoPro onto my phone so I could make this video. And so that gave me about 5-10 minutes where I was able to sit down and take a moment. Also, too, when you paint a mural, I've seen people do this before, where they're up close to it the whole time. And I don't know, like, you need to step back, like literally step back, like go far back and look at it, take a break, drink a glass of water or something, stare at it, go talk to somebody 5 minutes, come back and look at it with fresh eyes. And then well, this doesn't work or that doesn't work. And you can see where it's just not coming together. If you're with your painting and you're like 2 feet away from it the whole time, then it's like you're going to miss those parts, those little things, because you're too up close and personal. And the further that you get back, especially when it comes to impressionist techniques, the further back you get, the more it's going to start looking more realistic in the realm of realism. And the closer you get, the more it's going to be anti-pasta, like what? Like pointillism kind of situation. So remember to take a break and look at it from a distance. Sometimes it really depends on the client that I'm painting for. Sometimes they'll want to sit down and watch the whole thing and they'll be really interested. Sometimes they don't even care. They're just like, a business is like, yeah, just get her done. And then they'll last 5 minutes, they'll see it, they'll like it, and they'll, okay, and that's the end of it. Sometimes, though, I'll have people, well, they'll nitpick and they'll see little things. And that just kind of goes with the game, honestly. If they're paying you like $3,000 to do this mural, well, they're giving you $3,000. So, you kind of got to, oh, okay, and, take what you want to maybe have repeat business in the future. So you're going to have to take a moment and be nice to them. And especially because, they have a vision that they want. So before a mural, sometimes people will let me freestyle and do whatever. And then the other people that have like a vision, I like to sketch it out on a paper or like in the computer and send them an email depending, however. And so they really like precise. And sometimes if I have the opportunity, I like to have them there right after I do the rough sketch so they can see the sketch on the wall and have a basic idea of dimension and everything. And then I like to wait to let them give me a go-ahead before I start the painting process, because you don't want to paint the painting and then 2 hours into it, oh, I don't like that. And why is this thing and so you don't want to have to deal with that headache. So try to get them involved a little bit to get the go-ahead. The leader of the person who's paying you the money, because that could be different from the person who's actually just wanting a mural. Make the person who's giving you the money the happiest, because then you'll have it's better that you get paid that way, because they're the one with the money. And, you do want to make everybody happy. But if you don't make that customer happy and you make the other person happy, that's just telling the other person that they want the mural, then it's going to be a whole headache. And especially if they pay you with a card and they're not happy with the work, they can do a back charge with the bank. And then, you spent all day making this beautiful mural and then they just went to the bank and did a back charge on it. And then you end up having to give that money back to them. That really sucks. And it's never happened to me, but I've heard about it happening. And, just guard yourself, because it's not fair. Some people are crooks out there. They'll commission a painting from you and then they'll just be totally crooked about it, And so, I did have it happen once where I painted a mural and then they came after me when I wasn't there and they painted over my name and then they painted their name on the mural. Like they're the ones that painted it. So that really frustrated me a lot and was very annoying. But I also like to document pretty much everything that I do. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you have any questions, please contact me and I'll answer them as soon as I can.